Welcome, everyone. Nick Wagner, Senior, host of the Full Potential Podcast. It is Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, which means I'm here live with you on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. I was just telling Matt, so we stream live to all three platforms. And then what we'll do, Matt, is I'll put the video up on YouTube. And then afterwards, we will, after we put it live on YouTube, we'll also take the audio and we'll put that out on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, anywhere you can find your favorite podcast is how we'll distribute it. So first, I just want to say thanks for making time. So Matt Connell, welcome to the Full Potential Podcast, and I appreciate you joining us to talk about your career journey.
Nick, thanks so much. I really appreciate being here and you having me on.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. And Matt, I try to do this. I try to do it every Sunday night to bring on an inspirational guest like yourself to share your career journey, because I think a lot of people can benefit from hearing about other people's career journeys. I have a lot of early career professionals that listen to this, and a lot of them wonder what could be of their upcoming career. So having someone like yourself on that's done so much, I think is always inspirational for those people listening. And you've done a lot. So you're a professor. You're an entrepreneur. You run a program at Goodwin University here in Connecticut to help people that were formerly incarcerated, find a job and re-enter society. You've done an amazing amount of things, which we're going to talk about all those things today. But I always like to start, Matt, by asking the question, when you get to meet people and people ask, who is Matt Connell? How do you answer that question, and what do you usually tell people?
I usually tell people, I'm a parent, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a professor, an entrepreneur, and I just wake up every day and try to get through the obstacles of life to the best of my ability, and hope that I don't impede too many others in my journey. I'm moving down the path, and if I can help somebody along the way, I try to.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I asked that question because I have guests on. They usually do so many different things. So I always like to kind of get a sense of, how you introduce yourself. Um, so let's talk about this, because you've had a really unique journey. And like anyone, Matt, no, I very rarely interview people that say, I want to be this when I grow up, like as a little kid. They go to school for it, they become that, and they retire. It just doesn't happen very often. Most people, your career kind of goes in different ways. It zigs and zags. There's ups and there's downs, etc. So, well, let's go back to when you were a little kid, when you were a little Matt. Any idea
I'm
what
still
you
little.
wanted to do when you were a little kid? Like, did you have a dream of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
None, honestly. Like, I didn't even start to think about it until high school. Um, I'm sure when I was little, I had all those fantasies about being an astronaut or being whatever. I remember one of my friends wanted to be a lollipop salesman so he could just eat all the lollipops. I thought that was a good idea, but
I love that.
I did not pursue that. So I really had no idea until about high school, when to be honest, I got into a ton of trouble in high school early on. I got lucky enough to be in a program with two amazing educators that probably saved my life in a lot of ways. And at that point, I decided some part of my life needed to be focused on education, on my own education, as well as helping others that struggled through education as well.
So, and it's interesting because a lot of times when you hear that someone wants to be an educator or is an educator, it's because someone in their life was an educator. So did you have any family members who were educators, or was it really these two individuals that helped you that kind of gave you that passion?
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother on my dad's side was a teacher for years. I've got cousins that were, but really it was, uh, you know, Jim Solomon and Jerry Cogan from Hall High School in West Hartford, the Ask program, which was a program for kids that were in the bottom 10% of the class, but that had the potential to be in the top 5 to 10% of the class. And I don't know what it was about them. I've always tried to pin it down, but they instilled and inspired kids to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, and look, I have so much respect for educators. My wife is an educator. It is not easy. It is one of the most difficult jobs that you can sign up for. But I think and you're probably included, Matt. They're some of the most passionate people I've ever met for helping others. So I love how you give them credit for changing your life. So let's talk about this. You did, it sounds like you did not do well in high school. You got yourself in trouble. Was was the plan for Matt Connell post high school to go to college? Was it just to graduate high school? Like what was your plan at that point to figure out what you wanted to do next?
Yeah, so by freshman year, I was doing so poorly that the question was whether I would drop out, get kicked out, or honestly end up incarcerated, which was looking like a definite possibility. I ended up through this program and whatnot. I actually ended up graduating high school a semester early, um, and at that point, at 17 years old, I was lucky enough. I moved to Israel for 6 months, lived on a communal farm, a kibbutz. And there was really no plan for college up until probably beginning of senior year where I started to contemplate it. But besides that, it wasn't really it didn't look like it was in my cards.
Yeah. So you ended up graduating early that because of this program. It's interesting how the right educators can motivate kids in the right way, and having the right program can actually help someone to go from what you said, the bottom 5 or 10%, to actually graduating early. So that's quite the turnaround. How did you end up in Israel for 6 months after high school? Like how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest and somewhat quick about it, I told my parents I was graduating early. When it happened, I put forth a bunch of different ideas that I would do for that 6 months. One was, follow the Grateful Dead around the country. One was, scale every 14,000 foot plus summit in west of the Rockies, or what, and so they kind of talked me off some of those ledges, and just by his circumstance and happenstance, I was able to end up in Israel, very affordable, and get this amazing experience. So
And for you, so you said you ended up on a farm and you ended up going to school for agriculture. So was there a? I'm assuming there's a connection there.
yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, I ended up on the farm. I fell in love with kind of farming. I moved back from that. I did my freshman year at Keene State in New Hampshire. Moved back to Israel my sophomore year. Did my sophomore year abroad in Israel. Then I came back and I ended up at Evergreen State College out in Olympia, Washington. That's got an amazing sustainable agriculture program. And at the time, my thought was I wanted to start a farm school. To be honest with you, my goal was to start a K-12 school that created and focused curriculum around the concepts of agriculture.
Oh wow, that's interesting. Okay, and now like, so a couple questions. I have a couple questions on this. You ended up, I think, a really unique. I think studying abroad not once but twice at a very young age. I think is a really unique experience for students because it gives you this view of the world that most I think people don't have at that age. Uh, how was it? Was it difficult transitioning to the culture of Israel, either the first time or the second time? Like, tell us a little bit about what that was like, because I think a lot of people dream of doing that, Matt, but it actually never happens for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, so just it wasn't super hard, to be honest with you. Most people speak English. The hardest part was when I was 17. I landed in Tel Aviv. At the time, there was no consolidated bus station. The buses were literally spread out among city streets. Not speaking Hebrew at all, trying to figure out the bus I needed to get on to get to the farm. Getting on the bus. Right here, I am 17, not really thinking about things. Getting on the bus, and like, half of the passengers are soldiers with Uzis or M16 strapped to them, and you're like, kind of sitting there like, whoa, I'm not in I'm not in Kansas anymore, right? Like, like Dorothy has left the building, and so that was definitely a shock. But then, once you assimilate, it was cool.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and so you end up graduating from undergrad, And just full transparency, Matt is a lifelong learner. He has an undergrad, a master's degree, and a PhD. So we'll get there. But
Two masters, just to,
oh,
just
sorry, sorry, sorry. So he has 4 degrees. Uh, so what happened? You did. I don't think you ended up starting the school, from my understanding, the agricultural school. What you graduated? What happened next? Right. So what was, because I think for a lot of people that's a very pivotal point in your life. You graduate from school, and I mentioned to you, I have a book. My book's coming out next month. 10 Secrets to Success After Graduation. Most students graduate and they're used to all this structure. They go to this school and they have structure. They go to college, they have structure. You have a syllabus. You have to take these classes. Then you graduate and there's no more structure. So what did you do?
So, I mean, so it's interesting because I actually didn't follow a normal route. Like my undergrad took me a total of 5.5 years. Academically, again, it was about 3.5 years that I got it done in. But I ended up at between Keene, Beersheba, Ben Gurion in Israel. I did a semester at Central and then Evergreen. So I did 4 schools for my undergrad. Evergreen is non-traditional. So you don't get a syllabus per se. It's
Oh,
you
interesting.
you do an evaluation of the instructor. You create your own courses. And I took a year off when I moved out to Olympia. I took a year off to get residency, so that I could afford to go to school. And during that year, I started a landscape business. And I sold that landscape business to one of my employees so that I could afford to go back to school. So when I graduated, to be honest, at that point I had started a wholesale distribution company while I was in school that was selling like industrial hemp products, body care, food products. And I had some good sales going on up and down the West Coast to some co-ops and stuff. I came back east after graduation. Didn't think I would. I came back east and I tried to kind of take that online at the time. So this was like 99, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
it kind of tanked once I came back east. And from there, this new kind of trajectory started to some degree.
Interesting. So you've been an entrepreneur really for quite a long time.
My whole life, yeah.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about, we will get into your current venture, Yellowbrick, but I don't think I realized how far back your entrepreneurial roots go, which is all the way back to college, which is great. And I have so much respect, being an entrepreneur myself, of how much it takes to actually start your own business. So you come back to the East Coast. You ended up going back to school in 2001 to get a master's of education. But did you actually get a job before you went back to school? Like, what was your employment looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I started off when I got back. I was waiting tables, uh, cooking on the line at Chili's, and Bertucci's. I worked at Hark in Hartford for a couple of years as a job coach, and like in some of the houses and stuff like that. And then I went back to school to get my master's in special ed. And about halfway through that program, because it was special ed, I was able to get what's the certificate, like the ASAP or DSAP certification, where if you're enough of your way through getting your teaching cert and it's a needed area, you can start teaching. So I started teaching at that point at Buckley High School in Hartford as a special ed teacher.
Yeah, and that's so and I want you to share just a little bit about, for a lot of my guests who might not know, like, what how is being a special ed teacher different from being your typical educator in a K through 12 school, right? So what types of kids are you working with and helping as a special education teacher?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a at Buckley you have a pretty large caseload. The majority of my students, they had IEPs or 504s based around social emotional disabilities, so anger management problems, and stuff like that, right? So I was dealing with a lot of kids that my kids were going in and out of juvie, um, multiple suspensions, possible expulsions, and stuff like that. I worked with, but my caseload wasn't specific to students with severe kind of disabilities as far as intellectual disabilities or physical handicaps,
Yeah.
if you will.
I wanted to bring that up because I think the work that you did, uh, as a special education teacher, obviously helped fuel your passion to running the program you run at Goodwin today. Because I think there's a lot of tie-ins, and I think what you mentioned, I think a lot of people might not realize, Matt, that special education teachers work with students that have anger management issues or end up in incarcerated or end up suspended, right? So I think it's really interesting that you shared that. So I appreciate that. And again, thank you for the work you do, because you've probably changed a lot of kids' lives over the years. So I think that's fantastic.
Thanks.
So you're working as a special education teacher, and then why or at what point did you decide, you know what, I think I need to get my PhD too? Like, what, how does that exactly happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I think to be honest, part of my doctoral work, my was just to prove to myself, maybe to my parents, that I could do it. Right. I don't, I never wanted to be like a school administrator, so I wasn't going for like the 098 or 092, whatever that cert is. Which I so respect administrators in public education, but I never wanted to go there. But I did think, like, if I was going to start a school, at some point, right, in the back of my mind, there was that, like, if I was ever going to start a school, like, who's going to send their kid to a school if the person starting it doesn't have the education to back it? So there was part of that, was like, it's a door opener, right? People, whether you do or don't, because of the credentials, people think you know something.
No, no, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, I think anyone that has a PhD or doctorate, whatever, however you want to call it, I think everyone I know that has one, I have an amazing amount of respect, because I know what it takes to actually make that happen. Right? How much schooling that takes, the sacrifices you make, whatever your dissertation is, or your capstone project, whatever they call it at that school, and how intense that is. Uh, so so it sounds like you still had at that point in your mind that you wanted to have your own school. So kind of going back to your idea of having an agricultural school, you still have this idea of you wanted to have your own school at some point.
Totally, without a doubt. And potentially I still do. We'll see. We'll see. Still got some years ahead of me, hopefully.
No, and while you don't have your own school now, I think when we'll talk about what you're doing at Goodwin in a little bit. But how was it working full time and getting a doctorate at the same time?
I mean, it was hard. It's obviously a challenge, and at the time, I had just had my son. So he was young. I'm trying to think if my daughter was, no, she was born during my MBA. So my son, was born, and was a baby during the bulk of that process. And my wife, she was busting her butt, working full time in a family business as well. So it was hard. I'm not gonna say it
Yeah,
wasn't.
but I think you prove, Matt, that, because I think a lot of people, and look, I'm one of them. I have my undergrad from UConn in management information systems. I never went back to get my master's. I think a lot of us think, well, how on earth are we going to work full time and have a family and go to school? And you've proven that that is possible, right? And it's all about how you prioritize things. So I think you're an inspiration as far as getting additional degrees. And I think obviously you probably have a passion for learning, which I'm sure helps, because you are excited to do this. And for you, it's probably not a chore, if I had to guess.
Yeah, just to some degree, yes, that's correct. It's obviously there's core like aspects to it. For me, I do have a passion for learning. I also have a passion. Look, I grew up, you know, in kindergarten or first grade, was diagnosed with dyslexia, and have, to some degree, I mean, um, been trying to prove to myself my entire life that I'm not that kid anymore. So these degrees kind of help that, right?
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, I mean, being competitive with yourself is one way people are very competitive, and it sounds like you've been doing that. So tell me about. I have a couple questions. I want to know, how did you end up, like, was your plan when you got the PhD to end up at a university like Goodwin where you are today, or what, or was it really like, I'm going to get this doctorate, I'm going to start my own school? Like, how did you go from, because you got your doctorate in 2009, you got your MBA a little bit after that. How did you go from there and ending up at the college?
So a real quick journey was no, no, it was not planned. Like I always thought at some point I'd like to be involved in higher ed, maybe an adjunct here or there, whatnot. Never necessarily full time. Um, in 2007, I left public education and I came and started helping my wife's family business kind of operate. And then through a bunch of different roads, about 2015, those businesses after 30 years kind of closed down, and I went into private consulting, and it was just kind of happenstance, to be honest with you, that like around 2017, one of my former doctoral professors, Cliff Thurmer, who is the dean of the business and manufacturing school at Goodwin, called me up and he was like, I need help like to run the business program, and you've got like all the right stuff as far as credentials, as far as experience. Can you help me in? And essentially, like, I know you still have your own businesses that you're running. Like, we'll support that. Just come and help me do this. Um, and so I was like, without a doubt, it was the right time. In my family's life, like just transition wise, it was the perfect landing. And it's been a godsend.
So I have a bunch of questions because you have so many different things that you do, Matt, that it's hard to keep track of them all. But
It is.
we'll talk about Goodwin, and then we'll pivot and talk about your own business, the Yellowbrick that you started. But I want to just talk about Goodwin because the work you do there, I think, is just unbelievable, and I want to make sure everyone hears about it. So your title is Program Director of Business Administration Program. So tell us what you do at Goodwin. Like what does that mean? I know you do some teaching and you do some other things, but share what you do there.
Yeah, essentially, I'm responsible for oversight of all curriculum development within the business program. So, any certifications we have, the associates, the bachelor's program, I am responsible for maintaining faculty adjuncts to teach, and then accreditation and student. I advise students as well, along with my other full time faculty that have advising roles. And so really, to be honest, my job is largely to try to innovate, right? Is to try to every school's got a business program. So like I'm constantly trying to figure out like, and our student population is different at Goodwin. So what sets us apart? What makes it so we're not just white bread business program? Because that's another white bread business program isn't needed in my mind. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how to innovate and how to give our students the best education we have that's meaningful to them.
So you mentioned that the students at Goodwin are different from other business schools. Explain what you mean by that. How are they different?
Just in general, Goodwin's population of students is quote unquote non-traditional. So typically 28 or 29 years or older. So most of the time working adults, people that have been in life for a while, right? That they're not your 18-year-old kid kind of going off to college. These are individuals that might be working one or two jobs, might be single parents. But whatever, they also know the struggles of life and they're coming back to school to better themselves for a purpose. And so that's kind of what I mean by different.
And so no, I appreciate you just kind of sharing the demographics and why that's important. I love how you just told me that your job is to innovate because I think that's so important in education because education is constantly changing. I mean, if we've learned anything from the past year of COVID, here's another example of how education has changed with COVID. But I want to talk specifically about ENet, right? So the Entrepreneurial Network program, which I'm reading off of your LinkedIn profile, it's a business certificate program for formerly incarcerated reentry populations. So tell me about ENet because that's how I first learned about you. Was an article I can't remember who did it on the program and on you about the great work you're doing at Goodwin with this population. So share with my audience what this is about.
Well, I appreciate it, and I will say I've got an amazing team of people that work with me on ENet that without would not be possible. So ENet is a program. It's grant funded at this point through the we've gotten 2 grants over the last 2 years for about $500,000. We just got a $5,000 grant from the New Alliance Foundation, and the 2 bigger grants were from CT Next. And essentially, the grants were to provide an 18 credit entrepreneurial business startup certificate. So, like down and dirty marketing management. We've got a property management class in there, an accounting class, a business law, and a small business like class that goes over pitching and business planning. So down and dirty, like how to start and run your own business. And the first cohort was all individuals that had been justice involved, so formerly incarcerated. This current cohort, we started with 20 individuals, 10 that were still currently incarcerated at Sobolski Correctional Facility up in Enfield, Connecticut, and 10 that were formerly justice involved. And so this has honestly been one of the biggest challenges of my life, and also one of the most rewarding challenges, just navigating all of the moving pieces. In this current cohort, 7 of the 10 students have come home during the program. So we're trying to support them when they come home in their transition, whether they end up at a halfway house or they're at a family member's house. Loaner laptops. We bring groceries every week to class, so that if food insecurity is an issue, it's addressed. It might not be an issue. If it's not an issue, don't take the groceries or pass it along to somebody that does. But just, think about, you're trying to teach somebody who's got the skills, who's got the intellect to do it, but they've been, let's say, incarcerated for 15 years. Think about the technology difference in 15 years. So trying to teach somebody how to use a learning management system or Zoom, get on a Zoom call for class.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a struggle on some levels for that reason.
It's such an interesting program, and it's, I'm sure it's just such a huge benefit to the individuals that get to go through it. So again, you're helping change lives in all these things you've done throughout your career. So that's fantastic. And what I'll do, Matt, I want to make sure I say this. We'll link to your LinkedIn profile in the show description of both, the YouTube video and the podcast, so people can get in touch with you. And I'll also link to, Goodwin's site as well, so they can learn more about what you're doing at the business school there, including ENet. Cool. So just awesome. Kudos to you and the team. It's just, you should be proud of the work you're doing. I want to pivot now because in the career of Matt Connell, working at Goodwin and helping run the business school is not enough. So you're also an entrepreneur, which you actually started before you went to Goodwin, excuse me, called Yellowbrick. So I want to hear about Yellowbrick. And again, this isn't the first business you've started, but you've been doing this for over 6 years now. And I guess, what is it and how do you manage that and a family and working at Goodwin?
Yeah. So to start out, what is it? So Yellowbrick, when my partner and I started, so my partner, John Christensen, he's a tenured professor up at UConn in the School of Communications. He's a social psychologist. We started it, to be honest, as a parenting website. It was a site where parents could come, and we had experts from around the world providing different advice at different levels of the parenting stage. And we grew it. And then, like, towards the end of 2018, we had about 300,000 users coming to the site a month, and we were selling ads, and things looked great. And my partner and I looked at each other and we're like, we're an advertising company, and no disrespect to advertising companies, it's not what we wanted from a business model, right? We wanted to be educational, we wanted to be helpful, and we weren't doing that. And so we shut down that version of Yellowbrick, and we took a step back, and we were like, we started analyzing all the information and data we had. And what we came out with, and my partner, John, is like an amazing researcher. He spent his life on research projects, helping people be the better version of themselves. And so we essentially sat back and we were like, oh my God, we have a ton of information on what makes really good culture, right? Whether it's family culture or small team or large organizational culture. And so John started to develop these things into surveys and assessments. And literally just at the end of this last year, we started going out, and we're now working with a bunch of consultants. We've got some really cool cultural assessment products. We're very heavily focused right now on the DEI space. We're doing a lot of work with organizations and consultants around DEI.
So
Um,
Matt, just so my audience knows, that DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because
yeah.
not everyone has the HR speak like us. So,
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. So
who are the target clients of Yellowbrick? Like who are you trying to work with?
at this point, really, like any organization, small to large, and again, we have amazing tools for that DEI space, but we also do stuff in organizational communication, cultural competencies, so we really can span the gamut. Right now, we're a lot of our clients are business consultants that come to us because what they're finding is our tools actually help them really go in and pinpoint organizational issues. Like, real quick, for example, we had a consultant the other week who was working with an org and they thought that there was huge racial bias going on. And what came out was like the organization didn't see the racial bias, but there was a lot of age and gender bias. And so they were able to address that with the client, and create curriculum to help the client. So
Yeah, no, that it's fascinating, and I think um, one of the my favorite parts of that story is how you pivoted, because I think that's something that entrepreneurs, as you know, have to do. And it sounds like you successfully pivoted because you realized you were doing something, but it wasn't what you were passionate about doing. So I love how you made that change. Uh, how do you juggle all this, Matt? So before we get to my last question, I always ask, how do you juggle? Because I think a lot of people right now that are listening are like, does Matt Connell sleep? How do you do this?
so the short answer is sometimes better than others, right? Sometimes I feel like I've got four or five balls up in the air, and like I know where they all are, and I'm cool. And then there's days where I wake up, and whether it's whether you call it the imposter syndrome or whatnot, I am like confident that they're all gonna drop. And so in I try really hard to like make sure that family time is family time. And when I'm working, I'm working. But they definitely blend together. And what I say, not to be facetious or anything, is I look at somebody like Elon Musk or Jack Dorsey, right? Running multi-billion dollar multiple companies at a time. To the name of your show, Nick, the full potential. We all have that potential. It's whether or not we're willing to suffer enough to get there, right? Because it's not easy. But life in general isn't easy. Whether you're doing multiple things or you're just trying to get out of bed in the morning, it's not easy. It's the amount that you're willing to put into it is the amount you might get out of it.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Which I think is a great transition to my last question. I always close the podcast, Matt, with the same question for every guest. So, what is that one thing, Matt, that's helped you reach your full potential? So, the one thing that you would share with my audience that's helped you be successful throughout your career.
So the first thing I would say is, and I've been thinking about this question, just because of I had the prelude to it a little bit, is the first thing I would say is, so I'm nowhere near my full potential. I stumble every day, and I think that I've still got a lot of ladder to climb. But what helps me is um, my own unwillingness to concede ever. Right? Like, call it stupidity, call it grit, whatever you want to call it. Like, my own unwillingness to like be like, man, this horse has kicked me way too many times. Maybe I'll stop riding it. No. I'll just get back on. And then obviously, like, you know, both the support and honestly love of my family and stuff, but also kind of like that notion that, like, on some levels my mom looks at me sometimes like that 14-year-old kid that was causing her all this trouble, and I just want to prove her wrong. I just want to like apologize to her, and to some degree where I am today is a direct result of me just wanting to apologize to my mom as a child. So
No, I mean you made multiple comments and told stories about your stubbornness or whatever you want to call it, or your stick to itiveness, but or grit, right? I mean, I think clearly, Matt, you've overcome a lot in life, and you to your own credit, right? You've proven other people wrong. You've probably proven yourself wrong that you could keep going and you could keep doing it. So you started multiple businesses. You've gotten multiple degrees, right? I mean, you've been successful in a lot of different types of work, and it's just I kudos to you. It's fantastic. So I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your journey. I mean, we could. I always joke I'm not Joe Rogan, so I'm not going to talk for 2 hours. We probably could have talked for 2 hours about your career, but I just want to say thank you for making time and just sharing how no matter what you've done in your life, it's helped other individuals, right? Whether you were teaching, whether you were running your own business, whether you're working at the business school at Goodwin, everything you've done has helped so many people, and you should feel proud of how many lives you've changed. So I appreciate you coming on.
Nick, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me and you saying that. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And again, we'll link to your LinkedIn and the Yellowbrick's website, as well as the Goodwin Business School's website. If people want to get in touch with you to learn about your business, or maybe they want to go to Goodwin, or maybe they just want to meet you and connect and use you as a mentor, we'll give people multiple ways to connect with you. So thank you, Matt. Stay healthy, be well, and we'll talk soon.
You as well, Nick. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
You too.